Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really pleased to get to talk to EUCognition too. Yeah, well, I actually, as usual, have put way too many slides in, so I'm just going to go. I am going to talk mostly about the first two topics. So the behavioral ecology, what used to be called ethology, but first of all, it's hard to get funding for things with old names. I know sometimes some of us have to not call what we do artificial intelligence anymore for the same reason. But secondly, behavioral ecology now is taking more emphasis on the whole system, so how the behavior of the different species fits together. It's sort of along with niche construction, this idea that so it's a more holistic view. So anyway, I'm going to look at that from a perspective of theoretical computer science and try to understand it a little better. And then I'm going to kind of reverse that and say, okay, now that we understand the biology a little better, what is that telling us about the artificial intelligence? And then finally, towards the end, when you guys are really tired, I'm going to start really talking about the robots. So I promise there'll be some stuff about robots towards the end. So yeah, I forgot my beautiful animation. Sorry about that. All right. So I'm really not quite old enough to do this yet, but pretend I'm older and more famous than I am. The thing that first really got me involved in this field was a lecture when I was an undergraduate about saccading. It was in something called the biological basis of behavior or something like this at Chicago. And growing up in the Midwest, you know, and the stereotypes are true. I was raised in a religious household and everything else, but although we believed in evolution, it was a little different back then. But anyway, I was shocked to find out there was any part of my behavior that I didn't have conscious control over. I was really shocked. And it just challenged my entire worldview. And I was really fascinated because I was also a geek. So I thought, wow, you know, humans are robots in some sense. So some part of it works automatically. So a lot of this talk is going to be about this whole question. I mean, I worry, the reason I'm doing this talk for you guys is because I worry when we talk about autonomy that we think we have more control than we really do. So that's why I started with this slide. How can some human behavior be automatic? Why do the different parts of the brain have different architectures? So that's another nice thing about this slide. Not only are you seeing the pathway for doing saccading, which I'm not bothering to explain, but you can literally see that the neural structure and the connectivity is different in the different regions. So we know there's modularity, right? We know there's modularity in the brain. It isn't quite like the Fedorian modularity, but it's usually by function rather than by topic area. But we know. So why, if there's a way to solve all of AI quickly, do we have to have these different architectures mixing and working together? And now this may seem unrelated, but why do some species think more than others? Okay? And I'm going to claim that actually those are incredibly related. You can actually think of species somewhat like you think about modules. All right? So that's the way this talk is going to go. Okay, now, I apologize to all of you who've heard me talk before, because I always give this slide, but it's where I want to start every talk. If you buy a robot from Sony, and or something, it comes off the shelf, you got your eyeball, and it came with 100 actions, but it doesn't know what those actions do yet. Okay, so it just act of, square bracket 0, act of square bracket 1, right? So you have 100 different actions you could do, and then you tell it to go to Madagascar. Okay, that's the situation. How does it do it? Well, if there's a one-step plan, if Sony kindly put one of those 100 acts was Madagascar, then you might have to try all 100 actions, right? So you're the robot, you don't know what gets you to Madagascar. Okay, let's try act of 0. Let's try act of 1. All right. So this is the short version of the slide, actually. Sorry to do it quite quickly. But if it's 2 steps, so you have to turn left, then go to Madagascar, right? Then already there's 10,000 possible plans you could search for. All right? This is combinatorics. This is combinatorial explosion. This is why AI is hard. This is why natural intelligence is hard. Okay, and that's only 2 actions. The truth is that it's quite common that you have no idea how many actions there are. So you can get into this situation where you sort of eat, work, sleep, eat, work, sleep, eat, work, sleep. And how many of us made it to Madagascar, right? Maybe it's not your goal. Right. Certainly for my standard joke with this that a lot of people forget to get a passport, like my family. Anyway, let's see. Right. So this is going back to 1950s, and I don't remember when. AI started in 1957, and I think it took to at least 1959 until we figured this out. But it's still true, and nothing that we've done has changed it. We got to get over this combinatorial hurdle of finding things. But I'm not just saying artificial intelligence here, I'm claiming intelligence in general, all right? And when I say intelligence, I mean any kind of real-time behavior generation. So rocks don't have it, but maybe even amoeba and plants, you might think of their behavior. They are affected by, they perceive things in the environment and they go towards them, right? The plants go towards the light. If they're not getting light, they drop leaves off of that side of the tree. So they're perceiving things and they're acting. So all kinds of intelligence has to find the right next action. And one of the big things that's important in evolution is understanding that when you find a solution, saving that and holding it, that's the hard part, right? Entropy increases. So the hard thing is to, we focus a lot on innovation, but innovation can happen pretty randomly. You say things you don't mean to say. So, so once you've innovated, or you guys might misperceive something I've said. This happens all the time. You guys might give me more credit than I'm due and come up with a better idea than I had, right? So innovation can come simply from an act of perception. But once you've got that good idea, how do you preserve it? That's the hard thing. And I want to point out that there's a lot of different ways to do this search. So you can think of evolution as search, and we're going to talk about that in a bunch of slides, so don't worry too much about that. Individual learning over your time, like social learning, for example, where you see things, what we're doing now. And then online planning, thinking, cognition, right? They're all mechanisms of search, okay? And I think one of the reasons I get talks in this community is because years ago I put up a slide explaining that online planning / cognition is actually a bad thing because it's the slowest way to do it and the least reliable. You're least sure you're going to do it. But I'm not showing that slide today. Anyway, the point is that these are, if we're how many people here self-identify at least partially as computer scientists? Yeah, so not everybody, but to the extent we're computer scientists and we understand things like Turing compatibility, all of these are different ways of exploring the space. And what's interesting is that, again, like I was saying, that different species do this in different ways. All right. So why are they saying that I want to do the exploration like the bacteria by having tons of generations in one day? Or why are they doing exploration like apes, where we sit around for 80 years learning and thinking? All right. All right, so so again, back to being computer scientists, those of you who aren't, here's computer science in one slide. There's two ways to speed up search. One is concurrency, all right? So search is just hard, as you saw. It takes a long time. There's no way to get around that. But what you can do is if you have massive numbers of individuals, they can all search a different strategy. Now, it actually turns out to be complicated. How do you make sure they all search something different? Well, it's actually pretty random in nature, so you even need more individuals because you haven't carefully allocated the strategies. And then even if you find the solution, you have to communicate it, so that how do you know who's found the best solution? That's very hard. So again, if you don't have a good mechanism of doing that, you need even more numbers. But this is pretty much what bacteria do. I've gotten really interested in bacteria lately. You'll see why later. When they go, like they have normal life cycles that involve being in fruit and then going inside of you, right? So there's a big temperature change there. How do they deal with that temperature change? 99.999% of them die, and then the 0.01 that can deal with it reproduce again, and then they reintroduce the variation, and then they deal with it when they come out the other end, right? So they can just do that. So yeah, and then speaking of, pruning. So pruning is what we call it in computer science when you only search part of the space, all right? And I've got a picture. Oops, sorry, I'll show you the picture later. Sorry. All right, so let's talk about why concurrency is useful. And I'm going to talk about this in terms of culture. So again, a few of you have seen this slide before. And believe it or not, making yogurt is a big deal for hominid dispersal in Europe. So if every agent has a 1% chance of discovering a skill in its lifetime, but you have 2,000 agents, then probably in your society, somebody has discovered that, okay? And so that's the basic idea of how concurrency helps you out, okay? But again, notice this big problem. If it's easier to learn this skill from someone else, then there's selective pressure for culture, and that's a bit controversial. But this slide you haven't seen, even if you've seen that slide before, now I'm gonna look at this as evolution. If 1% of the agents have a better chance of discovering or employing a skill in their lifetime, then they're more likely to reproduce. Okay, so this is how the communication happens in evolution. It's not nice horizontal friendliness. It's survival of the fittest. All right. So you can think of Darwinian evolution also as concurrent search, but the transmission takes a lot longer because basically all the ones who don't get it die. Right? So eventually you get there. But like I said, that can be in a day if you're bacteria. Right? So bacteria can use this as a powerful means of learning something very quickly. Apes can't. All right. All right. So back to my promise about pruning. I said there'd be a picture. Right? Here we go. All right. So let's pretend that we can describe the space of all possible behavior as in 3 dimensions, just because that's what's easy to draw. All right. So there's the space of all possible behavior. And then we could think of the species as a subspace. So basically, every species just has a little tiny piece of that space of all possible behavior. All right. So yeah, so there's a few different species. Oh, you can't see the green one. That's all right. The green ones don't matter too much. All right. Now we could think of within that subspace, which is the species, there's individuals. All right. So can you see those guys? Okay. Yeah. So the idea is that the species is almost like a set of affordances. Right? There's a set of axes you're willing to work within as a species, and individuals spread themselves out in that. And then what selection does is it lets successful individuals drag their species around, basically. So if a few of those guys are doing better, then the axes will move over towards them. And so in the future, the species will be more like them. And notice that I've said species here, but you can think it the same way for culture. If you believe in cultural evolution, then you can think that basically the same thing is happening for culture within a species. All right? I just gave that slide at a biology meeting 2 weeks ago, and it came up in Q&A that people were still having trouble conceiving of how large the space was, although it made a striking impression. It went well. Don't forget, again, this is something we put on our first-year undergraduate computer science courses. But it's true. There are more possible chess positions than elementary particles in the universe. I mean, every little tiny thing, whatever, quarks. You're not there. That's just chess. And I just when people talk about you're like, oh, with our robots, we have to let them explore the space, and if we program them, then we're cheating. I just think, do you not realize how much we are biasing the space already? Because there was so much space we could have had. And we aren't even thinking about it because we've been pruned, right? Our culture has pruned us and our biology has pruned us. But when you really start thinking about what could you do, remember, this is just chess, and chess is trivial compared to life, right? All right. So all that ranting was basically that first part. So now I'll switch back to talking about biology a little bit. So I hope you guys are happy. Take a breath, because now we're going to switch gears again and say, what's going on with biology? Okay, so what is life about? You're supposed to laugh. I don't know. All right. So the main thing is that life persists, primarily through replication in a dynamic environment. So it handles the fact that the world is changing. All right? And the main mechanism, as I mentioned, is Darwinian evolution. Evolution is just change over time, resulting in diversity, is an interesting add-on there. And Darwin explained the diversity of species via 3 mechanisms: variation, selection, and transmission. So yes, this is biology in one slide. Actually, it's going to be 2 slides. Start over. So this is the tricky part. So some people have heard, how many people have heard you cannot evolve altruism? Nobody? Wow, okay, well, all right. So then maybe these slides aren't going to be very exciting to you. For a long time, people thought, you guys have heard of the selfish gene, right? Dawkins, you heard of Dawkins? He's the God delusion guy. He used to be a biologist, right? Actually, he was an ethologist. He did some really cool stuff on hierarchical representation of behavior, which my dissertation had a lot to do with. But anyway, a lot of people only read the title of the selfish gene, and then didn't read the whole rest of the book. Is given that genes are selfish, how do we have multi-gene organisms? And of course, there's cooperation, but whatever, people thought for a while that you couldn't get this, but maybe I don't need to. Maybe I could skip these slides if you really don't care. Do you guys want these the slides about vehicles and replicators? Let me get, okay, all right, so do this again. All right, what's transmitted is the replicator, okay? So there's variation, selection, and transmitted. What actually is transmitted is the thing that actually replicates itself, so that's like the gene, right? But the unit of selection is called the vehicle or the interactor. So the point is that, generally speaking, the thing that's doing the replication is not the way that you're getting selected on, okay? So in the current ecology, yeah, as I just said that. Quickly on this side, variation matters as well. I'm mostly going to talk about selection and transmission in this particular talk, but we do have some research on this. What was I going to say? If you imagine individuals as points in the space, right, if you want to evolve faster, you can actually just increase the variation. So you're increasing risk because you have a higher probability of not being a very good solution, but it also gives selection, basically, it accelerates selection. And that's been shown in, anyway, it's some cool stuff. But anyway, forget about variation right now, we don't have time. We're going to talk about back to the replicator and the vehicle. All right, so maybe, this is totally controversial. And when I say rats here, this is like Snoopy. It means rats I've lost. Okay, it doesn't mean like actual rats. All right, so maybe the gene, the thing that replicates, actually is at an advantage if it's away from where the crossover happens, because if it's right where the crossover happens, it gets disrupted and it's not successfully transmitted. So if this is true, which is still controversial, then that's the only case where the actual thing that's the replicator is itself losing or winning in a Darwinian battle, right? Normally, this is what we traditionally think about as like some deer fighting, right? And in that case, there's actually a lot of genes that are losing and a lot of genes that are winning, right? So what's new and what's interesting lately is that people are starting to talk about the fact, well, geez, families share a lot of genes too, okay? So maybe there's selection happening at a group level. And so you may have heard there's been a big controversy about, is it group selection, is it inclusive fitness? The weird thing about this is it really doesn't matter. There was like these old battle lines and people pissed each other off by not allowing each other to publish and giving each other harsh reviews. But basically it's gotten so close to each other that the most important part of this slide that you can think about the possibility of individuals sacrificing to help the others. That's true whether it's inclusive fitness or group selection is the better model. And basically, mathematically, they've been shown to be the same model, so it doesn't matter. But anyway, people still are fighting about it in nature and science. But what's interesting for us as roboticists is we don't care. Whoever wins, the point is that we can think about groups again, and it's okay. All right, so now that I've talked about this group thing, I can talk a little bit about why are humans uniquely autonomous. This is, so that you guys heard about it apparently, but one of the theories was that we're the ones who are particularly altruistic, right? That we're way more, and if you guys haven't seen Michael Tomasello give a talk lately, we're way more altruistic than any other species, and in fact you can't evolve altruism, we got it somehow magically, and that's why humans are unique. Another thing is culture, and here I'm going to split culture being horizontal transmission of behavior, right? So in contrast to passing it on genetically, passing it on to your conspecifics by social learning. I'm going to split that apart from language and art and music and all that stuff. I'm just going to use this really basic, and that's the Boyd and Richardson level, for those of you who know who that is. So we're going to talk about culture just in terms of horizontal transmission of behavior. Again, up through the 90s, people were thinking, well, maybe humans are really the only ones who do social learning and other animals don't do that. There's not strong enough evidence for it. Even though it seems like concurrency would be a good solution, it isn't actually acted on by other species. Language. Again, this is arguable, and it's just a rumor because we're talking about one person, but some people suspect that Chomsky was a creationist of some form. The language was given only to humans. And what we know that Chomsky publishes is that he thinks language was originally for thinking, and it just is a byproduct that we're able to communicate with each other. So he thinks that the point of language is the kind of computation we can do with it. So maybe language is what makes us special. Roboticists talk a lot about self-awareness, and maybe I don't read the other people who talk about this. I'm sure this came out of philosophy, and we'll hear more about this later, actually. The following speakers know more about this than I do. But anyway, self-awareness has been mentioned, and so people talk about mirror recognition and things a lot. And of course, consciousness, which aren't quite the same, as we'll talk about later. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you the quick answers to these. All right. And so now if you don't agree with that, you can just fall asleep, or maybe you should really pay attention. So that's going to be the next part of the talk. All right, so now I'm going to do the most radical thing I'll do here in a group of, how many people self-identify as roboticists here? Oh, less. Okay, it's safer than it used to be in EUCogII. All right, I'm actually going to talk about a simulation study. Again, maybe this won't surprise you guys since you already didn't know that you weren't supposed to be able to select altruism. But I was just trying to understand. I went to some conferences and they've said that, you know, the only reason humans have language is it's like a peacock tail. Because it's ridiculous for us to be giving away valuable information. I am giving up my survival advantage. You know, I could get way more money or partners or something if I just took this stuff and put it into science. Wait, that's also transmission. Well, anyway, somehow I could exploit this knowledge and not give it to you. So I'm giving up some advantage by sharing my knowledge with you. How could you have evolved that? Sorry, I should probably stick back here. I didn't believe that, and then being an AI kind of person, I gave it to a master's student who came into the lab and said, I don't believe this, let's run a simulation. Right? So that was Ivana Chacha, who's just started a PhD now, even though it's been years later, but that's the Dutch. Where is she? Utrecht, she's at Utrecht, I think. Anyway, so when you're doing an agent-based model, there's at least 3 things you need to think about. What is the environment that you believe is necessary for describing this behavior? What are the attributes of the agents? How do they differentiate themselves from each other? And then what do they do? What do they actually do? So, and then of course I'll go to the results. So the environment here is, it's called a torus, but that just means it's a computer screen where if you go off the left, you come around to the right, and if you go off the top, you come around to the bottom. Why do you do that? So you don't have to worry about corners and edges, all right? And why is it called a torus? Because if you think about how that would have to look, it would have to look kind of like a donut, all right? So, and it sounds better to say torus. Now, what my agents are communicating about is food processing techniques. This is something that's supposed to be a big deal for primates. It is a big deal for primates. Part of the reason they're so cognitive is that they can deal with a whole lot of different kinds of foods, and they can try to defeat tropical fruits and things like this. So there's a bunch of food in the environment. It's very important if you're a modeler, but not otherwise, that one of them you already know how to eat, so your agents don't all starve before they develop any culture. Okay. I can't believe the number of people who tried to replicate this and forgot that. I always say n-1. But anyway, most of them, in order to eat these food, you have to have some kind of knowledge, all right? So, right, let's see. And all the communication in this model is exclusively just about food processing. The language doesn't evolve. There is no language, really. So there's 2 species. There's almost no difference. They're very simple agents. Either you're a talker, which is the altruist, or you're a silent. Okay, this is Chacha's words. Which is free riders. And that's permanent and you inherit it. Then again, if you're not a robot, if you're social simulated, you actually have to encode even things like whether you're alive or dead or where you are. So they have location, they have age, right? This turned out to be incredibly radical. I didn't realize that. We just took it for granted. Of course, animals die, right? Apparently, it's very radical to build a maximum age into it. And you have an energy level, which you get from food. That's not radical at all. That's normal in a lot of models. Moving and breeding costs. If you're born with you take 20% of your parents' energy when you're born. I understand that's an underestimate, but and then the the one parent's in here. Okay, yeah. And then where are we? And then remember my yogurt example. So this is where the yogurt example is coming from. 5% of them, when they're born, discover one thing. All right. If you know anything more, if more than 5% of the agents know more than one thing, then they must have learned it from the culture. Okay. So that's what the agents look like. This is what they do. So at every cycle, it's a cycle-based thing. If it's possible, they eat the food that they're standing in some location. There's only one kind of food growing there. If they can eat it, they will. It may have already been eaten. That's why you don't want to give away knowledge. If you told everybody how to eat the bananas and then you get to the bananas and they're gone, you're a moron, right? So that's the cost of this behavior. So first of all, the food grows slowly, and if someone's already eaten it, you don't get it. And then secondly, you might not know how to eat it. You get there's coconuts. You don't know about coconuts, you're in trouble. All right. If you have enough energy, then you reproduce, as I said before. And this is really important and, again, controversial. Your offspring is where you are when... Strange, huh? Okay. If there's no energy or you get too old, then you die. And if you... otherwise, you age a bit and you move in a random direction. These are not smart agents. if you're a talker at that point, then you just speak. You say, you just disseminate. There's no misunderstanding. There's no lying. This is trivial. This is the most basic possible situation. You just say, by the way, here's how you open a coconut. Right? If you know how to do it, then you disseminate that. And everyone, whether or not they're inclined to talk, can hear. All right? Everyone can understand this. All right? So unbelievably, but that's why I'm standing here talking to you about it, this wins. So this is actually, is there a laser on this?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. It's the red thing in the middle? Yep. Okay, yeah. All right. So, yeah, because this is the microphone. All right, so this over here, sorry for the complicated graph, is the proportion of talkers. So we start out at 0 and we use mutation because it makes people happy. And so you can see that over time, and this is a lot of cycles, all right? These guys are only living about 50 cycles, so this is a lot of generations. But over time, they invade successfully, and they basically go to fixation, except for that there is still mutation again. But you notice it's not an easy path, because exactly what people think is going to happen does happen. So you build a little community of people all talking, and then you get invaded by free riders, and they get killed out. But this over here on the right is the average amount of knowledge. So these guys could only possibly have known about 7 things. But notice they could talk every turn. They're living 50 times, and they only know on average about 2.3, okay, or 2.7 here. Anyway, but remember what I told you before. The average amount of knowledge, if you look back here, would be 0.05, right, if it weren't for the culture. So these guys have accumulated culture. With this really trivial system, they've accumulated a culture so that on average they know this much stuff, all right? And you can see that it's the amount of stuff they know is correlated to the proportion of talkers in the environment.
So they just listen in, so to speak, the yellow ones.
No, these aren't the yellow. The yellow. This is the average amount of knowledge. So these guys. This is not guys. These are the guys. This is the proportion. This is the proportion of the cheaters. So that here it's all cheaters, and here it's almost no cheaters, right? And then this is how much they know on average. So by time cycle 8,000, the average agent knows about almost 3 kinds of food that they can, special food that they can eat.
The red line separates a space, so to speak.
Yeah, the red line separates the space, and I was just trying to show how much they know in order to show how they're correlated. But yeah, this is how much they know. This is how much how many agents are nice versus nasty. Is that okay? I think it's ridiculous, but that's what makes people happy, because in biology, that everything's about not just if you got there, would it be okay, but how could you get there in the first place? Could it invade? So Nash equilibrium, that kind of thing, right? How could you have gotten there, even if you had some random mutate? I don't accept this as a premise. I don't accept as a premise that initially everybody was selfish, and then somebody came and we all got altruistic. But this is basically, it's just like a proof. You have to take the worst possible case. So if the worst possible case is that nobody was friendly and everybody was antisocial, could you get sociality with a mutation? Okay, so, and if you can in the worst case, then you can certainly in the expected case.
How did the first talk appear?
Mutation, right. So it's like, yeah, there's a very low rate of mutation. That's why it takes a little while. Look, it takes a little while to catch on. Why is this hard to catch on? Because initially, well, wait, I'll give you some more slides, you'll see. Okay, oops, I forgot to, yeah, I already said that. Okay, this is proving, maybe I should answer that after all, sorry. So the reason that it's very hard to catch on here is because if you're the only one talking, you're really stupid, right? Because everybody else is getting an advantage and you're not learning from them, all right? But the reason this all works is because now I'll get to the next slide, sorry. This is I'll show you how, can you hear me if I do this? Yeah, okay. Maybe I should. Okay, I'll stay over here. I prefer to, I'm one of those people that like dances around and points at things, but I can't do that. All right, so this is the situation where I went through the entire simulation and I sampled every 100 cycles. And like I said, they were dying every 50 cycles, so I never sampled the same agent twice. And I looked at how many of them, how many agents knew how many different kinds of things. All right, so if you only knew one thing, and you're silent, and then I also looked to see how much energy they had then. Now there's a plateau here because you reproduce when you get to about 30 or something. So then you lose your 20%. So there's a ceiling effect here. But anyway, if you only know about one kind of food to eat, besides the default food that keeps you from starving, if you only know about one kind and you're a silent, if you're a free rider, you have significantly more energy than if you only know about one kind of food and you're a talker. All right? So that's what this is showing you, and that's true up through the majority of the population. Now what these numbers down here are is counts. So this is how many agents I found that were doing this. Now the reason that the numbers are much bigger for the talkers than for the silents is because the silents died out. Remember, they get out-competed. But so ignore that. What's interesting here is that the most, if you look at the ordering of the numbers, most of the silents don't know very much, right? So the peak is actually over between 1 and 0. But I didn't show you 0 because I was stupid. I should have thought of that. But so let's just pretend that this is what most of the silents know. They know this. The peak for the talkers is knowing over here. It's between these two guys, right? Between 2 and 3. So they know about between 2 or 3 things. So their average energy is about here, right? Somewhere between these two numbers. So their average energy is actually here. It's significantly higher than the average energy for the free riders. So this is called a Simpsons Paradox. For every amount of knowledge, you're worse off being a talker, but there's an unequal distribution between these. So you are better off being an altruist because you know more, because the others are telling you more. All right? Why is that true? Remember, they were not selective at all. It's just because your offspring are born near you, so you tend to be near your relatives, and they tend to be nice people. All right. So, sorry, how am I doing for time? Are we in trouble?
No.
Okay. All right. We're not in trouble yet, guys. All right. So, sharing knowledge about food processing is adaptive but costly. It's a Simpsons Paradox, like I told you. If you go, now this is why people thought you couldn't do it for 20 years, which fortunately you guys have been spared, but if you'd been in a biology department, you would have heard. If people ran mathematical models, so now this is going to sound more like robotics. People ran mathematical models of this, and they just sort of assumed infinite motion, infinite transmission, and then you totally eliminate the effect. There's no way to survive as an altruist if everybody gets the same information, right? Or if your previous position is totally independent of your present position, right? But that's totally unrealistic. If you make something that's more like animals, so it's not like I've totally abandoned robotics. If you make something more like a real animal, this is called viscosity, then you actually get something that's what we see in nature. All right, so enough of the model. I want to just start banging back through the biology. As I said, in the 90s, people were starting to doubt there was any social learning, but then there was a cover paper on Nature showing that there was culture in non-human primates. I think I've talked too long about the other ones, so I'm going to skip through this, how it works. But basically, just believe me that people got famous for saying that yeah, depending where you lived, you knew different stuff. And it's not just because of the environment, it was provably for other reasons. And then once they got the paradigm down, they quickly started showing it for other primates. But this is what I really want to show you. Okay. So this is a turtle, and the turtle is in a maze. This is a maze for a turtle. It's shaped like a V, but its favorite food is there in its dish, and it's not doing very well. Yeah, okay. So it got 2 minutes, and turtles are just like robots. You speed them up on video. So this is the 4 robots and the 4 turtles. The 4 turtles, and they got 12 trials each, and I'm not going to draw the bars in. That is the result. Not one of them ever figured out this maze, this incredibly complicated V maze. All right. So then what they did was they took Wilhelmina, the tortoise, and they taught her to go around this thing. It took a month and a half. A PhD student, are you guys PhD students? A month and a half to teach a tortoise to go around. So now here's the observer tortoise, just the same situation as the other one was. Here's Wilhelmina doing what she's been trained to do. This is the first shot, all right, and, oh, I want that, oh, that's really good. For some reason, I'm going to go around like this, and, oh my God, look, the food's there. Okay, yeah, and they're screaming happy postdocs, right, because it's been 3 months or something, right? So, So that was Moses. That was the pet robot. Sorry, tortoise. But all the tortoises did okay. And what these two different colors mean is that the white ones go the other direction. So they've generalized, probably because they're too moronic to know right from left. But they do generalize as well. So and believe me, Wilhelmina did not generalize. She only ever went the same way, right? Because she'd been took a long time to train her. So yeah, so this is in a solitary tortoise. Now, unfortunately, Celia Hayes is now going around showing that this shows that social learning isn't special at all. Everybody who's ever tried to get social learning to work in a robot, sorry, I'm talking fast again, aren't I? Everyone who's ever tried to get social learning to work in a robot knows there's a correspondence problem. We know it's hard to do this. There is an evolutionary cost to learning to recognize you have to recognize your conspecifics to mate with them too, but to figure out where they're going and what they're doing, there must be a cost. But what I believe is because of the concurrency stuff I've shown you, there's so much selective pressure that if you're going to take a cognitive strategy, if you're going to search in your own life, that you will absolutely wind up also stealing answers from your conspecifics, and maybe from other species too. Okay?
Is it not just one little skeptical question?
Yeah, sure.
And that's control conditions for this kind of stuff. This is really fascinating stuff to show in a forum like this, but there are a lot of other signals that tortoises can be picking up on. So can you just comment on that?
Yeah, so the paper here is, I didn't say, it's in Biology Letters. It's a really good journal. And this got reported in Nature and Science afterwards. So that's just arguing from authority. But if you look at what they're doing, they scramble all the wood chips so they couldn't be smelling it. All right? So there she goes. Yeah. And now they come back and see they scramble the wood chips. But basically the main reason that you know that they're not just smelling or something is because they get confused and go the other direction sometimes. In fact, Moses, the one time Moses turns out to be a girl. The one time Moses did it wrong here, she missed out once. She went down to the end, turned around, and came back on the wrong side of the grate. So it turns out that they hadn't even represented the fact that they needed to come down the other side of the grate. It's just that the mechanics of the tortoise were such that they almost always came down the other side of the grate. So yeah, I don't know. There may be other things going on here, but it's pretty unlikely. So it was significant enough to get published in Biology. Even bacteria communicate information, and this is really interesting. Again, I'm just going to fly by this, but these things used to be thought of as parasites because they came in and they stuck their own DNA in and they couldn't even reproduce it themselves. And then they would sit there and they'd evolve with the bacteria for a few generations. And then the bacteria would get stressed and they'd say, okay, time to go. Massively reproduce and then explode, suicide bomb the bacteria. So that seemed like parasitic behavior, but remember what I told you about bacteria before. This is a normal part of how they evolve. They sacrifice themselves all the time. So now it turns out that these guys, and these guys too, these things are called plasmids, and they actually go through little tunnels towards each other, and they program the bacteria to talk to each other this way. These are the things that make you antibiotic resistant. They're also the things that that shift you from being a nice bacteria to being one that carries the plague. They also help you deal with heavy metals like mercury, which are really bad for bacteria. So it's actually, people are starting to think that rather than being parasites, these things might be more like libraries. There's like code libraries. So you'll have these plasmids. They'll even go between different species of bacteria, but they'll live and they'll be passing around in the vicinity of the challenge that they address, like antibiotics, like mercury. So I think, yeah, you get sharing throughout nature. I'm going to skip. How much time do I have left? What time is it now?
You have a quarter of an hour.
Yeah, I'm going to skip this. I'm going to skip over. Anyway, well, I'll just say very quickly, if you haven't heard of the Baldwin effect, you should. Basically, when you have phenotypic plasticity, you can evolve faster. But I'm going to skip through our results because I want to get down to I wanted to spend 15 minutes on the robots. So I've just told you a bunch of biology, and before that I told you a bunch of computer science. Can we say anything about autonomy yet? And you've noticed I have said some stuff during there. And you remember I said this. So I hope that you can get, from here we know, I made that not red anymore. So the things I think I've already demonstrated here is that you can get horizontal transmission of behavior even in bacteria, in tortoises, all kinds of things. And you can get altruism. There's a debate about what that even means. But if you mean you pay a penalty to help others of your same species, then you can get that, and it's not unique to humans. Okay, so now let's take a look at some of these other ones. I'm actually going to go ahead and jump down to consciousness just for the fun of it. All right. So I keep coming back to this diagram, but that's because as a computer scientist, I'm totally into abstraction. I don't care if we're talking about species or culture. Now I'm going to talk about individuals. All right, so individuals define a subspace. So now these are a culture, and here's a bunch of individuals, and they're exploring different possible personality types or whatever to play within a culture. And now the little dotty things are going to be individual search. So ideas, behaviors that individuals decide to express. So within the personality type that you've chosen or your parents gave you or however you want to think you got it, you can do a lot of search, and you can try a bunch of different behaviors. Some of them you can do concurrently, right? So you have a lot of brain cells, and you're doing a lot of learning all the time concurrently. But some things can only be done sequentially, all right? So this is just I'm waving these papers at you, but if you want, you can go dig these out. I've been starting to do the consciousness thing again. I don't think I'm that old yet, but yeah. I think what's going on just for conscious awareness. This is not self-awareness and language and all that stuff, but just for conscious awareness, it seems to correlate. We've got again nice neuroscience papers about this. It seems to correlate very well with the ability to learn to learn. So there is implicit learning even when you're not particularly aware of what's going on. But for example, you guys all know about the Morris mazes, that you throw a rat into a big swimming pool of milk and then they swim around, and if they don't have a hippocampus, they can't learn where they're going. Okay, Richard Morris himself, although he doesn't talk about it much, but he published a paper, showed that actually they can learn that maze fine without a hippocampus if they've previously learned such a maze. So what they really can't do is they can't learn how to learn that kind of maze. And the way I got involved in this whole thing in the first place was similar. It was a bunch of monkeys that had been taught something called transitive inference. It's a standard task. But they'd been taught a bunch of pairs, and then they got a really weird reward signal. And some of the monkeys didn't seem to be aware of what was happening. They were going very, very fast. And they still performed just like the ones that were taking time. But they didn't notice that their reward schedule had changed. So they didn't seem to learn from the change in reward schedule. So this is something we're still trying to get funding to start playing with this, but I think with humans instead of with monkeys. It's easier to ask humans if they're aware or not. But my argument to go back to that space is what I think consciousness is just an amount of time that you allocate, which you allocate in proportion to your action selection uncertainty. So if you know what you're doing, if you're very certain about what you're doing, you get faster and faster at it because you're not taking the time to sort of observe it. So it's sort of like the spotlight model. Where do you turn your spotlight? You've got resources that can help you learn to learn, that can look for the metastructure, and you allocate that in proportion to uncertainty. And that kind of fits into some of the really nice stuff happening in Shadlin and Bagatz at Bristol are doing on trying to understand decision-making and the time to reaction time decision-making. So that's like my demystified version of consciousness. Okay, so I don't know. That's why I just said nah instead of no, because it's me and it hasn't been proven yet. But it's one way to think about it. So I'm not going to show slides about self-awareness. I'm going to say not really here because there have been a lot of mirror tests in other animals. So I find it very unlikely that the other apes aren't, at least some of them aren't self-aware. So I'm just going to wave my hand at that and hope at this. But what I really want to talk about is language, because I do think language is really special. All right. So what limits the size of culture? Why is it that tortoises don't have laptops? If they're able to do social learning just like us, then why are we the only ones with laptop projectors? Right? Okay, there's two different things going on here. One is there are biological trade-offs that determine how much information you transmit per generation. Okay? So I don't know why, but people tend to forget about this whole biological trade-off thing. Do you remember learning in high school about how species can choose to either have like thousands of offspring and not give them any parental care, or to have a small number of offspring and give them lots of parental care. Do you remember that? That was a trade-off. And what that trade-off allows is diversity. It means that all the different solutions along the axes are equally viable. All right? So it's not that one strategy is better than the other. It's that you can you have a range of possible solutions that are equally good. And that's why you get diversity. And as I said before, diversity is good because then when the world changes, you have a way to evolve. You have a way to move forward, right? You have something to select between, and so you can adjust to changes in the ecosystem. All right, so there are a bunch of trade-offs that determine how much information you can transmit per generation. And then I'll talk about this later. For humans and bacteria, the quality of the information being transmitted improves. All right, but we'll start with this one. So you guys don't seem to be very into this stuff, but so I'll skip that actually. But here's one of the trade-offs. Life history, how long do you live? Remember I said that I found out from my reviewers it was very weird to have put a maximum lifespan. It turns out if you go on to the Royal Society meetings about aging, it's incredibly controversial to say that age is regulated, even though we know different species live different amounts of time. The pharmaceutical industry would like to assume that age is like a big accident and that if we can fix these accidents and it will stop happening. All right, so somehow this is controversial, but here you go. Anyway, I made some of the agents live for 40 years in cycles and some live for 50 cycles. And you can see two things. One is that there's much stronger selective pressure, so these guys go into the fixation situation. So this is, remember, the proportion of talkers. So they get there much faster. These are both going 1,400 cycles, right? So you get there much faster when you have 50 years. And then also look at the the end state. So when you're basically at fixation, these guys only know less than 2 things, and these guys know almost 3 things, right? So why is that? It's really simple. The longer you live, the more chance you have to hear stuff. All right? Basic. It just took a while to learn it, figure it out, and we were sitting there going, what's going on, for a year. But anyway. And there's a lot of other things. So for example, why does cultural accumulation peak when you have a higher proportion of altruists? It's because, there's more people talking. So again, you have a higher probability of hearing something because more of the agents that are around you, there's a limited carrying capacity. You're only going to encounter so many agents in your lifetime. If they're all talkers, then you're going to learn more. Now that also implies that if the carrying capacity of the environment increases, so if it becomes a richer environment, stuff grows better, or in the reverse, if suddenly you find yourself in a desert and there's much fewer agents, then you would expect a decrease in the amount of information that can be transmitted. The extent to which you can rely on this transmitted information is going to trade off with the extent you have to rely on individual learning and on evolution, biological evolution, genetic search, right? So the easier you can get this, the more this other problem comes. But then think about it, if you have to live longer to get this advantage, and every time if you live longer, then you have your cycle rate is slower, like your biological cycle rate. That's already a trade-off. Let me show you another one that is less controversial, so I could find pictures of it. If you have a big brain, it turns out big brains are correlated with long life, slow maturation, big size, and sparseness. Okay, basically, big brains are correlated with a cognitive strategy. We won't be too surprised by that. Okay. And they're also correlated with a long life. So this supports my previous statement that if you're going to take a cognitive strategy, then you're going to have to spend a lot of time on it, and and you're probably going to be doing a lot of social learning too. So both individual and social learning is part of your strategy then. But to have a big brain, you have to be big yourself, and if you're big yourself, then there's going to be fewer of you. So we've already got fewer to learn from then. So that's what this is showing you. It's just somebody's gone out and figured all this stuff out. Biologists are great. They have so much data, and then they have relatively few theories. So it's really great to just go out and get that stuff. So okay, so that was part of it. So first of all, we have a fixed amount that we can transmit per generation. But what's happening in humans that's really different from any other species, again, except bacteria, is that what we transmit is getting better and better. Okay? So, and that's why, again, it's still, can you call that, it's definitely evolution because it's change, all right? Maybe it's not Darwinian evolution, that's the controversy. But this stuff is changing, and it's basically improving. What we teach our kids now is better than what we were taught with schools. Well, for most of it, I mean, like the other thing, it's going to be zigzags. But generally speaking, we keep getting better at doing things. So that's basically, so I in this one paper, I tried to differentiate between size and extent. The amount of information that the behavior it can generate increases as representations become more efficient. And I claim that that's basically what Simon Kirby has been showing for years with his iterative learning, for those of you who are up on that. If you're not, it's a nice literature to read. Okay, so now this still says, why are humans, I've just claimed that humans are the only ones in this situation. Why would that be? Okay, and this is something these are journal articles. I didn't know philosophy journals publish this stuff for me, which is great. Even though I've got no proof for it, but I think what's going on is basically that humans are the only primate species capable of precise vocal imitation, so we know that. Well, you know, it's always hard to force an animal to do something, but we're pretty sure that nobody else is showing this. Now, this is where it becomes my guesses. Communication, when you have vocal imitation, you're communicating a huge amount of information. So you get 2 to 3 seconds. We know from, again, Ernst Popel, I didn't put his name here, that it's about 2 to 3 seconds where you can do perfect imitation, phrases. So is that me? 4 minutes, okay. So we're getting there in case you can't tell. So you can communicate huge amounts of information like volume, pitch, timbre, and of course temporal rhythm. And so my claim is that this is what allows for there to be redundant encoding. So we couldn't have it thought to invent language. Nobody knew what it was. But language could bootstrap because just like the genome, and look, most of biological evolution has been about getting this replicator to the point where you get the diversity we get now. So that works by having protected things that are replicated a lot on the genome that are important, and other places that are almost begging to be mutated, right? Because they're less protected. In fact, there's chains of replicated material, and then how long or short the chain is affects massively the most frequent changes in the bacteria, like the temperature changes I was telling you about. So okay, so now my claim is that just because we have a unique combination, did I show? I don't think I have the graph in here, Alice. Okay, so my claim is that we have a unique combination of being apes and having big brains and already being really long lives and being very, very cognitive, and also having this wonderful transmission mechanism, which is vocal imitation, which occurs across a lot of different taxa. It's not just humans, also obviously birds and elephants and things, but not in the primates. We're the only ones there. So I actually just said that. Again, another person look at it, Alison Ray, has some nice stuff about the evolution of language from phrases. Okay, some human uniqueness. Mostly we're not unique. I think we're out at an extreme for utilizing cognitive strategies, but we're out there with the other apes. And we just happen to have a signaling system that itself is evolving, which essentially allows compression. So then we can do more with less. So we're able to manipulate symbols instead of just manipulating the entire objects, right? And it's interesting, in the last 10,000 years, hominid brains have been shrinking, which I think that's when language really, like proper modern language, must have started, because why else would that happen? So we know why big brains are a pain, but we don't know is like they were growing for 2 million years or something, and then all of a sudden they started shrinking in less 10,000. And I think that's because we've just gotten so good at transmitting culture that we can spare mothers a little more pain. So, all right. You may have noticed that I've been talking about autonomy and consciousness, but not robots. So the last 10 minutes is going to be about what I think about consciousness. No, about robots, sorry. First of all, consciousness is not that big of a deal because of what I told you. So I think you can actually already meaningfully call some existing robots. If they have modularity and episodic memory and they're learning tasks, I'm happy to call them conscious already. It's just partly to be annoying, but partly to get people to really think what they mean by consciousness. And therefore, I don't think we should confound consciousness and ethics. Ethics is about society and about stabilizing things. But again, the other two speakers are better at this than I am, so I'll skip over this right now. So this is one thing. Cognition is incredibly dependent on culture, all right? Basically, it's not an adaptive. It is incredibly hard to find your own answers. And this is what the autonomy thing gets to me. It just takes forever. If you really had to search the whole space of possible answers, it would take you forever. It would be impossible. To the extent that we're cognitive, we are cultural, and we also still have massive, massive genetic priors too, right? We have huge amounts of information coming from our biology and huge amounts of information from our culture, and that's why we're as smart as we are. And so we're just not going to get anywhere with some isolated tabula rasa robot that sits in a corner and plays with some dolls, and it's not, even the dolls are already priors, right? They're from our culture, but still. All right, so we have actually done some of this. As much as I've been talking about biology, I have had some PhD students doing some AI. So for example, we tried to take Deb Roy's brilliant-looking PhD, where he was figuring out, that he could take real-time streams of language and then do a bunch of co-occurrence filtering and figure out like what's the blue triangle and what's the red ball. Well, those are discrete objects. So we said, what about, can we learn behavior? And yes, we cheated again. We're not on a robot. We're in something even simpler than a robot, Unreal Tournament. And it's still like unbelievably intractable. We got such little stuff out of this, it's unbelievable. But we still got an IEEE paper, so that's nice. but it's really, really hard to learn in real time, even socially. So I don't want to underestimate how important the genetic priors were too, and the long life, the number of presentations. And then the other thing is, because learning is so hard, you want to build systems. So this is actually my current PhD student, Bidan Huang, has actually made our stuff work on an iCub, so we're cool too now. So if you want to, you can download this. We have Posh running in YARP now, for those of you who care about Posh and YARP. But anyway, AI can contribute to cognition by helping with search, and that's actually all I'm going to say. The space of possible behavior is incomprehensibly vast. The space of action sequences is vaster, right? So there's all these choices, and then you have to move through it and build a life. And that was the combinatorics thing where you got to 10,000 from 100 in one move, right? The power and extent of cognition, consciousness, autonomy are vastly overestimated. I just really think that this is a problem in philosophy of mind. It's just one, it's just one end of the biology of what we're doing. We're very complicated organisms, and a lot of it is, our conscious mind is just a small part of everything we're doing. Now I sound like Rod Brooks again, but he's right. All right. Biology and sociality are key to our intelligence. All right, and those are my conclusions. I want to thank, this is the bacteria guy, this is the tortoise woman, in case you couldn't guess. This is my new PhD student. This is my partner who also makes all those nice graphs. In R, which I should learn. There's Ivana, the new student. Mark Wood was the one who did the stuff with Unreal Tournament. Avery was an undergraduate who helped out. These are my current students who are all working on understanding cultural variation and antisocial punishment and costly punishment. We're doing a lot of social science, but I just didn't have time for it. I want to thank some funders, although I'd love to have more, and tell you guys that we have a new book.
Thank you, Joanna.
Did I finish ahead?
What's that?
Did I finish ahead?
About on time.
Oh, I'd never do that. Okay.
Right, we have some time.
We changed the criteria.
Yeah, okay.
We have some time for questions. So, all right, go ahead, Christoph.
Yeah, Jonah, thank you. There's one thing in your chart where you say that humans are uniquely autonomous, you see, which I was expecting to see perhaps is free will. Free will. I'm here because I wanted to come here to meet you and other people, my own personal will. That's specifically human, I think, no?
Awesome question. Okay. Let me get, where's the human? No, that's not it. Let me get the chart up in case anyone else doesn't know what, forget this. There it is. Yeah, it doesn't matter because there's a bunch of these, right? So why wasn't free will up there? Yeah, I'm not done it. I strongly recommend reading Freedom Evolves. I'm not a complete determinist because I learned as an undergraduate that if you believe in determinism, you never get anything done. So I'm some kind of wacky functionalist. I think we have more free will than other species to the extent that because we have language, we have concepts. So we have more ideas, even the concept of self. Yeah, I didn't go into this very much. Even the concept of self is is something that if you haven't heard people talking about it for a long time and you don't correlate lives to paths and things like that, even if other chimpanzees do seem to be aware that they are something that's different from the other animals in their troop, that's not the same as thinking, I'm a man and I'm going to die, or that, that I want to be like him or something. So I think that I don't think we're unique in having free will. I think we're unique in the extent of our free will, and that's because we have the concepts to know what the options are. And that's all because of language. So that would be my answer. Great question.
Okay. I want to criticize maybe the metaphor of search that you seem to be using.
Okay.
As a metaphor, I mean, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I would say that it's a very hypothetical or theoretician's perspective that there is that space and that you're searching it. Well, I would say that in nervous systems, in development, in learning, maybe in evolution too, I would say it's more the opposite problem, that you are localized somewhere. For instance, you're very early in development, you already have a lot of structure, actually a lot of constraints, very coordinated, early movements very coordinated. And the developmental process is one of this uncoupling, of going places from there. Not pruning at all, it's sort of the opposite of pruning, of actually developing some branches, developing flexibility. And it's only sort of in an embedding that one would say, well, that system is searching something. But in terms of the processes, I would say the searching metaphor is misleading. I would think more of a dynamic metaphor of being in some place and going some places. Yeah. And very structured locally, actually very low dimensional locally. Yeah.
Okay. I both love and hate your question because I absolutely agree with you, and what I hate about it is that you didn't see that was what I was trying to say. So absolutely, that's why I'm saying that we need to think about the information coming from biology. Absolutely, we're immensely constrained. We were pruned by evolution, and therefore our neural structure is very limited. And I totally agree, I did not mention at any point development, but I totally agree with you that the part of the process of development is starting from constraint and then opening up a little bit. And that's where you get that little bit of individual search that our species does allow itself.
But now you say again, we were pruned by evolution. Does that presuppose that early on the huge space was sampled and then we contracted, being pruned? Yeah. Well, I think the history of evolution is the opposite. That the system started very, very localized, and then they. I
absolutely see what the problem. So let's try to think about within. You're thinking about that. Let's see. Wow, this is very hard to describe. Maybe I should go back to my picture again. Where's the picture? My favorite picture. Okay. I won't put actually I'll just do it this way. Okay, this is exactly what you said, your question was exactly what I was trying to draw here, that there's this huge space, but you don't even think outside of some little subsample of it, right? And so now you're saying, did evolution ever sample the whole space? No, of course not, right? And that was my argument. My argument is that we can't even conceive of, that's why there's those xenobiologists that try to imagine other forms of life, right? We're just like scraping the very bottom of the barrel of the possible ways that life could have expressed itself. But we did sample a lot of stuff, and a lot of things have been pruned, like dinosaurs or whatever, right? And those hominids with bigger brains that I was just talking about. So it's not that we've gotten to look at the whole space. We can't. That was sort of the point of the talk. Part of the point of the talk was that I've seen a lot of people that think that if you're limiting your robot somehow by doing this great sin of programming it or something, then you're destroying its future. The point is that you could never look at everything. You need to point it at some little piece, and biology has done this for us, and that was done by some combination, this is going back to Darwin, right? Some combination of the chance variation that was available, so that's limited where we have searched, but then also the selection. So within of the possible things we could do, we wound up with these amazingly well-working systems over 4 billion years. So are you feeling like we're not totally opposed? I love the way you're thinking. So if I agree with him, even though he disagrees with me. All right. So, yeah.
Yeah, Vince. Sort of continuing what Graeber just said, but in a more philosophical way, of course. I like all of your talk except the beginning. I wasn't so sure. In the beginning, I thought this is not going well, but then it was. So.
Good, thank you.
What was it that I wasn't so sure about? You presented the problem as that of selection out of a certain set of actions. And it seems to me that this leaves out a very important component of our bodies and the environment, which is that these are continuous. So it's not that I have a specific set of things that I can do with my hands right now. It's a continuum, and therefore, in a sense, you might say it's an infinite number for any given action that I'm doing right now. I don't have to go through iterations of combinations at all.
No, I know. So you're upset about this one.
So the computation complexity. So it seems to me that this is a slightly different problem from the problem which I have, or biological systems have. And so I just want to put a warning sign. It's dangerous to think of this as action selection. Action selection seems to be, I have a certain set of things here, and I can select amongst these. That's not what I'm doing.
Okay,
it might spoil your job. It didn't.
No,
it could. Be careful.
So again, I was just taking the simplest case to describe it. So if you had something so discrete as this would still be this big of a problem.
Right.
Of course, you're right that action is continuous, and not to see where is it? Oops, that's all the stuff I left out. Not to pitch the book again, but one of the things we really talk about there is that in nature, it seems like there's things going back and forth. That, like for those of you who are machine learning people, almost like EM, that you're trying to there's two different problems, which is what are you selecting between, to the extent that you are selecting between. So Tony Prescott's stuff is he basically visualizes streams of potential actions that different parts of your brain want to do, and then he has claims about which parts of the basal ganglia, I think, that does the inhibition of all the stuff except for the one you wind up doing. So yes, there's two different problems, which is coming up with what are the possible things to do, and what are the things that, and then how do you decide within the possible things to do what you do. And it seems, although again, computationally, it could be possible that you wouldn't have a separate system from action selection. If you look at biology, it really does look like that's a lot of what the frontal lobes are doing. They're doing the selecting, and a lot of the rest of the brain is doing the generating of the possible behaviors and learning of motor skills, and of course, smoothing cerebellum. Again, it's just that modularity isn't a necessary way to order things, but it's a more probable one. And when you decompose a problem, you're just more likely to come to a solution. So it's not the necessary solution, but anyway.
Okay, Mark. I wonder if you're getting a little bit too committed to the search metaphor. I'm really interested in search. I spend a lot of time looking at different ways we can do search. But it seems to me, I guess from Newell and Simon, where they sort of started conceiving as intelligent action as some sort of heuristic search, whether you sort of bought into that metaphor and are describing the way that the world is in terms of search, instead of thinking about search as a metaphor. Because is there not a danger if you just start thinking that all intelligent action is some kind of search, you're going to get stuck sooner or less by something like a frame problem? Frame problem. I don't think, I have the same biases that you have. When I see things, again, so I guess I am getting old, because I went through learning all that stuff and thinking it was really cool, and then thinking, oh, that's the old way of thinking about it. It's not cool. I'm part of new AI, and I don't believe it. And then, and basically, I've come back to thinking those guys were pretty smart, and it was a good way to describe things. Now, there's other problems like logic as a representation. I don't believe for a second. I'm much more, I like the Bayesian guys. I'm not one of you. I'm not enough of a mathematician, but probabilistic representations seem a much better way to deal with things. And the frame problem, humans don't really entirely solve it either. I actually think there's a lot more breadth and a lot more rote memorization going on in intelligence than any of us want to believe because it's boring. But I just don't think we should let the fact that in the past people managed to put themselves into a corner mean that we should ignore everything. To switch back into, there's philosophers, I can do this, Kuhn. You know, there's a weird thing in new AI where it seems like people want there to be paradigm shifts. They want to say, I want to be the person that's the revolutionary that puts us over into the new paradigm because that's this glorious thing Kuhn described. But if you actually read Kuhn, he says it's kind of a tragedy that once you've gotten the new way of thinking about things, you no longer have access to all the old information. So, I'm sorry if that was...
Well, I just wonder whether you're forced into the metaphor of search because through this commitment to a very strong computational metaphor, you've expunged all semantics and what you're trying to do.
I am trying to argue that computation is a good strategy for thinking about biology, actually, and there was a few of the slides overlapped with a talk where I did exactly that. And in the UK, at least, there's actually people saying, oh, computer science was a 20th century discipline, we can get rid of it now. I think that's just because we're young and don't have a lot of political power and they're trying to kick us out of the universities to save money. But I actually think it's totally insane, and it's partly because people don't understand that computational science is a fundamental way of describing the way the universe is. And maybe not, using Microsoft Word isn't a fundamental part of the universe. But anyway, but this stuff, the theory of this stuff. So I'm going to challenge you at this point. Instead of being defensive, we'll go the other way. Point out something that, rather than saying you're worried that something couldn't be done, do like he did, and give me an example of something that I get blindsided by using this intellectual tool. Experience? Why?
Experience, phenomenal experience. You treat consciousness as resource allocation. You use the spotlight model of consciousness and say consciousess is not such a big deal, and therefore you cannot address phenomenal experience.
Oh, you mean qualia?
Yeah. No,
okay.
Qualia, the thin veneer of the research that is the phenomenal world.
No. So no, because if we're talking about experience, I have no problems with that. So yeah, so we're experiencing. So like I said, you have attention that you have more resources on some things, but you're also getting information and forming memories and forming expectations and behaving differently. You're learning. I don't see why that's in any way challenged by what I described.
I think you ruled it out of bounds.
What? Why?
There's a huge area that any science of cognition must address that you cannot even approach using this method, which is phenomenal experience, because you're treating, you define consciousness as some kind of a resource.
Yeah.
Which is a peculiar use of that word.
Yeah, it is. I know, and that's why I said conscious attention, usually not consciousness as a whole. But yeah.
Avoids all the hard issues.
No, qualia. I totally don't avoid it. No, yes.
Well, okay. Let's leave it there. We're not going to
okay.
Qualia
Right.
Well, no, before, I think there are others who haven't asked a question yet. So yes,
to go into a different topic, could you give more information on the altruist model? And like what I would like to know is, for instance, what were the costs to the altruist of talking, and what is the benefit in your model of having more knowledge?
Right. That's this one. The cost to the altruists was they were benefiting their competitors. So the other agents around them were able to eat the food before they got to it. And that's why if you know the same amount of stuff, you have lower energy.
So they have less access to food?
Yes, less access to food because it's been eaten by the people they informed. The benefit of knowledge is that there's more different kinds of food available to you. So there was a bunch of kinds of food in the environment, but you didn't know how to eat them until someone told you.
And they were spread uniformly?
Yeah, they were just distributed randomly. Yeah, and everybody walked randomly. They didn't go towards what they knew how to eat. They're very stupid.
I also have a few questions about this this particular simulation. The first is a really general point. It looks like your result. You can't tell me correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like your results are not specific to autonomy. So it looks like you'd get this result even if the selective advantage had nothing to... I mean, you can either take one approach to autonomy and say any kind of selective advantage means increased autonomy, and that's, I think I would think the topic of this meeting is hoping to find a more narrow notion of what autonomy is and not just anything that helps you survive.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. I was evil, but not quite that evil. So I don't know if you guys noticed or not, but I was basically defining autonomy as being the same as cognition, which I define as being the same as real-time search. Okay, so that was what I was defining autonomy as. I never was explicit about that because I didn't want everybody to turn off in the first slide. but I was not saying that adaptiveness is autonomy. No way. I don't think bacteria are autonomous.
Still pretty broad. It's still pretty broad. But
it's still very broad, yeah. Okay. So I was basically saying to the extent that you use a cognitive strategy. So that doesn't change in this. In this simulation, you could say you have more freedom because you have more knowledge, but you don't have more autonomy.
And I guess that's something we can discuss in the today and tomorrow is whether we should narrow that down. And then the other one was a more specific point about this simulation. As I understand it, you have a concept of a talker, but you don't have the concept of a listener in the simulation. And it turns out you can be a listener even if you're not a talker. So the free riders, everybody's a listener, but some people are talkers. And that's quite weird, I think, because usually we think that the capacity to understand and to transmit are related. And so I actually think you tied one hand behind your back. You'd get a stronger result if you made the listening capabilities tied to the talking abilities.
You're absolutely right. And the point is that, again, this was the worst case. So I was just trying to show that even in the worst case, you still get selection for altruism, for pro-social behavior. I don't want to call it altruism.
But I just wonder if maybe the results, so showing what you showed, you're right, it's the worst case, but maybe if you wanted to extend this in any way, it might be better to go back and have some tie these abilities together rather than having them independent. But that's me jumping in. Okay, Tony wants to follow.
I've got another 10 slides if you guys want to see what I'm currently working on. They're down here.
Well, let's just hear.
I was thinking exactly that, and I thought whether you tried whether the altruist strategy could be outperformed by a liar strategy. I mean, the way one thing would think of a free rider in this context would be one that agent that's able to listen and also to talk, but
we have done that. It works exactly the same way. So if the propensity for lying is inherited, whether culturally, either or from biologically, then you're going to be around more other liars, and you're going to be out defeated by the ones who are altruistic. So again, this is just the simplest case, and you can add in that complexity, but the results hold.
But because in the Dawkins models, for instance, what you get is an equilibrium.
You can get much more. You can get much more complicated behaviors. Exactly. But again, we're going.
Is that everybody gets to be altruistic? This is really unrealistic.
So I will show you now. I now have sufficient justification to show you that what I'm currently working on. So this is actually a distribution. Remember, we're talking about trade-offs. This is a distribution, and I'm sorry for the people who are actually from these cities, but it was the cover of Science in 2008. These are people that punish. So you're playing a public goods game, and I won't go into the details of that. But basically, these are guys who are the proportion of money spent punishing people who didn't contribute to the public good. That's the green here. This is the proportion of money spent punishing people who did contribute to the public good. So this is people. So you can see that in Athens and Muscat, they just punish everybody, right? But and this is highly correlated to GDP, incidentally. And here's Athens. Sorry, but yeah, the Middle East and basically the former Soviet Union, and for some reason Athens, Istanbul is on the edge, and we can look at this behavior here by city too. So this is the traditional thing. Well, it's because the Swiss did this. So this is really the traditional thing. Is that if you don't allow punishment, then cooperation degrades. And there was this assumption that this would cross zero, but in fact, if you let them play more and more, they just keep the start and end point the same, and the slope gets shallower. Which maybe that's what's going on here. That basically in the older cultures or something, it's just flat. There isn't that much degradation, but also there isn't that when you introduce the punishment that you leap into these more cooperative states. But anyway, performance, and what's really interesting to me is, look, the guys in the Far East, which for some reason includes Melbourne, they don't recognize this. They don't just read the instructions and think, oh, I better start being good. They climb, they find the gradient. And so if they can follow the gradient up to a highly cooperative thing, why can these guys not do that? And poor Istanbul is the worst of both worlds. So they look like Europe here, and then they look like the Middle East there. But anyway.
Well, I'm afraid we.
But just quickly, but the answer is, as far as we can tell, and again, this is work in progress. But we've got lots of nice slides and things. But oops, it looks like it's ecological. So it depends. And this is true in bacteria too. That the extent to which you want to invest in altruistic behavior depends on the extent to which it's the best way to exploit the substrate. That's a very nice paper about this. It's not mine. But it's fantastic. So yeah, there's reasons to go both ways. Again, diversity of strategies.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We can continue the discussion during the coffee break, which is now. But before we leave, let's thank Joanna one more time.